We are in a great spot with laptops right now because all the competitors in this space are making such good devices that if you're buying a new high-end laptop this year, chances are you're buying something awesome because we have 4 completely different chips that are just excellent. We have Apple's custom silicon, we have new chips from AMD, their HX300 series, we have new chips from Qualcomm, the Snapdragon X Elite, and we also have finally new chips from Intel that don't suck. They're Lunar Lake chips. And all of them are competitive. Like they're truly energy efficient, powerful devices. And they're awesome. The thing is, there is an inconvenience to this whole circumstance. And to fully understand the problem at hand, we have to kind of go into how good these devices actually are. So you've probably seen a chart like this before. It's showing Cinebench performance across several devices. And Cinebench is a benchmarking program that's used by companies and by reviewers like myself it's just like a quick and dirty way to show you the top end performance of these chips. It's neat, but it's not a good representation of how we actually use laptops. Like typically, when a person buys a thin and light laptop like this, it's idling. You're just using the laptop in a very chill and relaxed state. You might be like typing a document or going through emails or browsing the web. The truth is most people aren't looking for faster and faster laptops. We just aren't. What does matter though is energy efficiency, and that is where these new devices really shine. These new chips are so good at just sipping battery on very light tasks. Now, power consumption does go up a little bit if you're streaming videos, but it's very rare, if ever, that an average user will take one of these thin and light devices and just go full blast on it. But energy efficiency gives you something that's awesome: battery life. And the battery life on these devices is just so much better than laptops of the past. Like it's something that Apple has had the crown for 4 years at this point, but today they're all really good in terms of battery life. And in addition to battery life, the other thing that energy efficiency gives you is battery health. Like if you aren't charging these things as frequently over the course of ownership of these things, the health of the battery pack is just gonna be better if you're charging it half as often, right? And so also with energy efficiency, you get an easier device to cool. These things don't run as hot, so there's less thermal strain on the components, but also you get thinner heat sinks, you get fewer fans, quieter fans, so these systems are quiet. Now, they're not silent, only the MacBook Airs are a truly fanless system. All the Windows devices still have fans, but they're way better than before. Now, if you're curious about battery drain when the devices are closed, like when the lids are closed up, it's inconsistent. I've done a bunch of testing on this. The anecdotal kind of conclusion that I'm going to draw is that it's nothing to do with the hardware from the manufacturers. It's entirely to do with Windows. I feel like sometimes the battery drain is acceptable. It's like perfectly fine. And other times it's awful with no rhyme or reason. Now, I think Apple does it really well. I think they control both the hardware and the software, so they're able to tune that whole battery drain when the lid is closed way better. But if that's really important to you, Windows just sucks at it. I don't know if they'll ever fix it. You also get really good GPUs across the board now. Apple's M3 chips are capable in terms of hardware, but because there's not a lot of games, you gotta run like game porting toolkit to be able to pull it off. So if games are really important to you, obviously you don't get the MacBook. And same with the Snapdragon chips. It's got decent gaming performance, but still there's some games that don't run all that well on the ARM-based chips. But the other 2 chips, the new AMD and Intel ones, get really good frame rates, especially for devices that aren't even marketed as gaming laptops, right? Like if you're a kid who's trying to con your parents into buying you a gaming laptop, you don't have to use that word. These are just really good for doing that stuff. The onboard GPU of the new Intel chips are particularly impressive to me. Like obviously great frame rates, but the thing that's most interesting is just how little energy it uses to be able to pull that off. Even on Intel's slides, like when they first showed that stuff, everyone was skeptical, right? It's like, that's not possible for a company, let alone Intel, to pull off. But it's legit. I can only imagine that the next generation of gaming handhelds that use these GPUs from Intel, like I think there'll be something special, but absolutely just very impressive GPU performance from Intel's Lunar Lake. Now, a quick note about RAM and storage. So typically when it came to Windows laptops of the past, one of the biggest advantages that they'd have is that you have removable or upgradable RAM and storage, right? And Apple devices didn't have that luxury. But nowadays, you still have removable storage on all the Windows devices, or most of the Windows devices, but almost all of them don't have removable RAM anymore, all the new ones. Most of that RAM is now soldered onto the motherboard or the chip itself. I don't think it's a deal breaker, but it is unfortunate. The silver lining though is that all the new Windows devices start at 16 gigabytes of RAM or more. I think that was a requirement that Microsoft put out for their kind of Windows Copilot programs, that if any new device that is going to be part of this thing, you got to have 16 gigabytes or more, which is good in that sense. Apple still has their 8 gigabyte MacBook Air models at the entry level, which is it's continuously frustrating. I think this is the last year that they do it. Now, Apple Intelligence does run, like their AI stuff, does run at 8 gigabytes of RAM on their like system-wide AI stuff. But if you're a developer and you want to use any of their AI like generative code, so Code Complete or Swift Assist, you need 16 gigs of RAM. So if you're a developer and you're looking at a MacBook and you want to use any of that generative AI code stuff, 16 gigs or more. Now, I only bring this up so that people who are looking for that feature in Xcode are aware of the RAM requirements. I am firmly in the camp of like, do not buy a laptop or change hardware for its AI capabilities. Like I'm still there. If anything, I think Windows Copilot is a complete scam. That's a whole separate conversation. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in terms of hardware are the displays. So MacBook Airs, the entry-level products from Apple, have IPS panels. They're okay in terms of image quality, and they are energy efficient displays, but when you compare them side by side with any of the OLED panels that are often available with the new Windows devices, OLED just looks so much better. And a lot of them are running at higher refresh rates. If you want to play fast-paced games, they look awesome on these Windows devices. So if you're talking about like my favorite pick, if I had to choose like one of the 4 chips that I think is just like most interesting, for me it's the Lunar Lake chips. They are so awesome this year. Like I think the energy efficiency is excellent, and also the wider availability. Like as nice as the AMD stuff is, they're just not on a lot of devices. And if you want, you know, Apple's chips, like there's only one company that makes it. With Windows, with Intel's chips, like there's just so many companies that have adopted this new second generation of Core Ultra that it's like I like choice. That's really nice to be able to see that. In terms of just like actual devices, I like the S14 a lot from Asus. I think this is like, it's super thin, super light, but in terms of just like crazy battery life, I did a dedicated video on this, but the Lenovo Yoga Slim 7i, this is like, it's longer lasting than even a 15-inch MacBook Air in terms of like just raw battery life. So everything I've talked about so far paints these laptops in a really nice light, right? We have a lot of options to choose from. They're all performant, they're all energy efficient. It's great. But the one piece of this conversation that kind of guides this whole thing is pricing. And the pricing for all these laptops is expensive. These start at like $1,200-$1,300 and they go up. And here's the thing, if you have a huge budget and you can buy a $1,300 laptop, that's awesome. It's a great year to buy a device. But for most people, you have a more normal budget. And let's say you want to buy a device that's like, you know, $600 to maybe $800 in price. So that's where things become inconvenient. So typically, when you have a smaller budget, $600 to $800, you would just buy a product that's like 2 years older or maybe last year's device, right? Something that's previous generation that, you know, you get most of the good stuff. You don't miss out on much buying the last year's product. But now, in the landscape of laptops we have right now, the previous generation of product, like last year's laptops, especially in the Windows space, they suck in comparison to the new stuff. And it almost doesn't even make sense to buy one of those things. So typically, let's say you buy like, you know, let's say you get like a 12th gen or 13th gen Intel Core i7 laptop. That would run you $800-$900 maybe a little bit cheaper than that. But that is a significantly worse product than these things. Like you get much worse battery life. You get a hotter device that will probably have more thermal stress on its unit. You'll have, you know, louder fans. You have a worse GPU. Like it truly, I would say that most people, if you're gonna buy a 12th gen or 13th gen Intel laptop right now, you're gonna regret it. Like you'll absolutely be like, God damn it, I just wasted this money buying a previous generation. And it's because the new stuff is so much better. So here's the weird thing. I was asked very recently, just a few of my friends, like, what laptop should I buy right now? $700. And I looked at what options we have. And the thing is, I landed on a MacBook, an M1 MacBook from 2020. It's crazy. Like, never, ever have I been like, hey, you want a budget option? MacBook. Never has that been the thing. But in the way we have Windows laptops right now, it just does not make sense to buy in that space. It's super inconvenient for people that are budget limited like that, which is a lot of, right? That's where the most purchasing happens, in that range. And you're just locked out. If that's your budget, if that's a hard limit of $800, you are locked out from the good tech. And I just really do not recommend buying any of the older stuff. It's just too big of a gap in terms of performance and just everything across the board. Okay, There you have it. That's my take on the current landscape of laptops.